$3,000 a week. That was the headline of the Craigslist ad. No exclamation points, no sketchy emojis, just a flat, dry offer that seemed too good to be true. I sat in my studio apartment, staring at the eviction notice taped to my mini fridge, and did the math. 2 weeks up there would clear my back rent. A month would fix my car. The listing was for a winter caretaker position. The location was vague, marked only as a pin drop deep in the Superior National Forest, way up in the arrow tip of Minnesota. The description said the owners were going to Europe for the season and needed someone to keep the pipes from freezing, the driveway clear, and the generator running. I emailed them at 2 a.m. I got a reply at 2:03 a.m. No interview, no background check, just a digital contract and a GPS coordinate. I should have known then. I should have looked at the speed of that reply and realized that desperation smells the same over the internet as it does in person. But when you are broke, your survival instinct for danger gets overwritten by your survival instinct for poverty. I packed my Honda Civic with canned food, a heavy coat, and a sense of dread I kept pushing down into my stomach. The drive north was a slow fade out of civilization. The suburbs of Minneapolis gave way to strip malls, then to endless fields, and finally to the oppressive looming wall of pine trees that defines the Iron Range. The radio signal died 3 hours out. The static hissed like ocean waves, eventually cutting out entirely, leaving me with just the sound of my tires crunching over packed snow. I stopped at the last gas station on the map. It was one of those places that looks like it hasn't been renovated since the 70s. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing buzz. The cashier was an old man with skin like leather and eyes that looked like they had seen too much darkness. He watched me fill up the tank. He watched me buy 3 packs of beef jerky and a lighter. When I put my card on the counter, he didn't run it immediately. He just looked out the window at my car, loaded down with gear. "You're going up to the Blackwood Ridge," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I said, house sitting. He nodded slowly, like he was confirming a diagnosis of a terminal illness. "The money is good," he muttered. He slid the card back to me. "Just remember, son, when the sun goes down, the woods don't belong to us. They belong to the old things. Keep your doors locked, and for God's sake, don't answer the whistling." I laughed it off. I gave him a polite nod, grabbed my receipt, and got out of there. I'm a rational guy. I don't believe in skinwalkers or wendigos or whatever campfire stories the locals use to scare tourists.
I believe in negative bank account balances and the freezing point of water. I drove the last 40 miles on a logging road that barely qualified as a road. The trees were thick here, crowding the path, leaning in like they were trying to crush the car. By the time the GPS announced I had arrived, the sun was already dipping below the tree line, painting the snow in shades of bruised purple and gray. The cabin was beautiful in a jagged, aggressive sort of way. It was an A-frame structure, massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the dense forest. It looked like a scar on the landscape. Dark wood, black metal roof. It sat on a ridge overlooking a valley that was nothing but miles of untouched snow. It was silent. Not the quiet of a library, but the silence of a vacuum. No birds, no wind, just the ringing in my ears. I keyed in the code on the smart lock. The mechanism clicked with a loud mechanical thud that echoed through the clearing. Inside, the place was freezing. It smelled of cedar and something sterile, like ozone. The furniture was covered in dust sheets. The only thing that looked lived in was the kitchen island. Sitting right in the center of the granite countertop was a single heavy envelope. It had my name on it. I dropped my bags. My breath was visible in the air. I ripped the envelope open. Inside was a stack of cash, the first week's payment, in advance. 15 $100 bills. And beneath the cash, a single sheet of thick, cream-colored paper. It was typed, no handwritten scrawl, just neat serif font. "Welcome to Blackwood Ridge. Thank you for agreeing to watch our home. The heating system is automated, but the isolation of this location requires a specific set of protocols to ensure your safety and the structural integrity of the cabin. Please read this list carefully. These are not suggestions. Failure to follow them will result in immediate termination of the contract, and we cannot guarantee your safety beyond that point. Rule 1, the The thermostat must never be set above 68 degrees. If the house gets too warm, the timber expands. If the timber expands, the gaps open. You do not want the gaps to open. If you hear a groaning sound from the walls, drop the temperature immediately and hide in the bathroom until it stops. Rule 2, from the hours of sunset to sunrise, the curtains in the main living room must remain drawn. The glass is reinforced, but it is not unbreakable. If you leave the curtains open, you will see lights in the tree line. These are not flashlights, these are not other people. Do not look at them. If they realize you can see them, they will come closer. Rule 3, you may hear knocking on the front door between 3 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. This is a rhythmic knocking, 3 sets of 3.
Do not open the door. Do not look through the peephole. Do not speak. The knocking is a test. If you acknowledge it, you invite it in. Rule 4, there is a landline phone in the kitchen. It is the only connection to the outside world. If it rings, answer it immediately. If there is static on the other end, hang up and lock the basement door. If there is a voice that sounds exactly like yours, screaming for help, listen to it until it stops. Do not speak. It is trying to learn your cadence. Rule 5. The basement door has 3 deadbolts. Keep them locked at all times. We do not have a basement. If you unlock that door, you will find stairs going down. We do not know where they go. We have never gone down them. If you hear scratching from the other side of the door, turn on the television to maximum volume and wait for morning. Rule 6. If you see a deer standing on its hind legs in the yard, do not take a picture, do not stare. Turn off the lights and lay flat on the floor. It is looking for a silhouette. Rule 7. Every night at 9 p.m. you must place a plate of raw meat on the back porch. It does not matter what kind of meat, beef, pork, chicken. Just make sure it is raw. By 9:05 p.m., the plate will be clean. Do not try to watch what eats it. If you forget to feed it, it will come inside to find its own meal. Rule 8. You are alone here. If you hear someone walking upstairs when you are downstairs, it is just the house settling. Tell yourself this out loud. Say, it is just the house settling. If you believe it, the noise will stop. If you doubt it, the footsteps will speed up. I stared at the paper. My hands were shaking, just a little. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to crumble it up and say, okay, very funny, nice prank for the new guy. But then the sun fully set. The light in the kitchen shifted from gray to artificial yellow. Outside the massive glass windows, the world turned pitch black. I looked at the reflection of the room in the glass, and for a split second, I thought I saw something standing just beyond the tree line, 2 pale small dots, like eyes reflecting the light. I moved to the window to get a better look, my hand reaching for the glass. Then I remembered Rule 2. If they realize you can see them, they will come closer. I froze. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I wasn't a superstitious man. I was a man of science and logic. But looking at that black wall of forest, I felt a primal, lizard-brained fear that I hadn't felt since I was a child. I yanked the heavy velvet curtains shut. The swoosh of the fabric sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. I looked back at the list. Rule 7. Feed the thing on the porch. I looked at the digital clock on the microwave. 8:55 p.m. I had 5 minutes. I opened the fridge.
It was stocked, just like they said. I found a package of ground beef. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This is stupid, I thought. I am a grown man feeding imaginary monsters because a piece of paper told me to. But the silence of the cabin was heavy. It felt like the air pressure had dropped. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and warp when I wasn't looking directly at them. I grabbed the meat. I walked to the back door. It was a solid oak door with a small window at the top. I couldn't see anything outside but darkness. I unlocked the deadbolt. The click was deafening. I turned the handle. The cold air rushed in, biting my skin, smelling of pine and something else, something metallic, like copper, like old blood. I set the plate down on the mat. I didn't look up. I didn't look left or right. I kept my eyes on the floorboards. I stepped back inside and slammed the door, locking it instantly. I backed away, staring at the door. I waited. 8:58 p.m., 8:59 p.m., 9 p.m. Silence. Then, a sound. Wet, slurping, the sound of bone crunching. It was loud. It was right on the other side of the wood. Whatever was eating that meat wasn't a raccoon. It sounded big. I could hear heavy, labored breathing, like a lung punctured by a rib. I stood in the kitchen, paralyzed, gripping a steak knife I didn't remember picking up. The sound stopped at 9:04 p.m. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then, a soft scrape against the door, like a long nail dragging down the wood. And then nothing.
I exhaled, my knees almost giving out. I walked over to the thermostat. It read 70 degrees. Rule 1, the thermostat must never be set above 68 degrees. A deep groaning sound echoed from the walls. It sounded like the house was in pain, like the wood was screaming. I scrambled to the dial, my fingers slipping on the plastic. I cranked it down. 68, 65, 60. The groaning stopped. I sank to the floor, my back against the cabinets. I looked at the stock of cash on the counter. $3,000. I looked at the darkness outside. I wasn't getting paid to watch a house. I was getting paid to be the bait. And the night had only just started.
I forced myself to stand, my legs feeling like they were filled with wet concrete. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, shaky exhaustion that settled deep in my bones. I grabbed the list off the counter and folded it into my pocket, keeping it close like a holy text. The kitchen was quiet again, but the silence felt different now. It felt attentive, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for me to make another mistake. I checked the basement door. Rule 5, 3 deadbolts. I tugged on the handle. Locked, locked, locked. I didn't hear scratching, but when I pressed my ear briefly against the white wood, I felt a vibration, a low, rhythmic hum, like a massive generator running deep underground, or a very large throat purring. I stepped back quickly, my hand hovering over the remote for the small TV mounted in the corner, just in case. Then, the phone rang. It was an old rotary-style wall unit, beige and bulky, a relic from the 80s. The bell was mechanical, a shrill, piercing ring-ring that shattered the stillness and made me jump so hard I nearly knocked over a stool. Rule 4, if it rings, answer it immediately. I didn't hesitate. Hesitation was a luxury I couldn't afford. I snatched the receiver off the wall hook and pressed it to my ear, my other hand bracing against the cold granite counter. "Hello?" I said, my voice tight. Static, a wash of aggressive white noise, like heavy rain on pavement. I was about to hang up and lock the basement door as instructed, assuming it was the bad connection, but then the static broke. "Oh God, please, let me in." My blood turned to ice. It wasn't just a voice. It was my voice. It wasn't a recording. It had the specific trembling cadence of my own panic, the way my pitch rises when I'm terrified. It sounded exactly like I had sounded 5 minutes ago when the house groaned, but amplified. "It's cold," the voice, my voice, shrieked. It sounded breathless, like it had been running for miles. "They're in the trees. I can see the eyes. Open the door. Please, open the goddamn door." I stood frozen in the kitchen, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I stared at the reflection in the oven door, half expecting to see myself screaming back at me. "Do not speak. It is trying to learn your cadence." I bit my tongue, hard. The sharp pain grounded me. The taste of copper filled my mouth. The voice on the other end dissolved into sobbing, messy and wet. It was a perfect auditory mirror of a breakdown I hadn't had yet, a premonition of what I would sound like if I cracked. "Why won't you answer me?" the voice whispered, the volume dropping to a terrifying intimacy. It sounded like it was right next to my ear. "I know you're in there. I can hear you breathing." "I can hear your heart." I held my breath, squeezing my eyes shut. "Let me in," it hissed. "It's our turn." The line went dead. No click, no dial tone, just sudden, absolute silence. I hung up the phone slowly, my hand shaking so badly I missed the cradle on the first try. I looked at the basement door. The deadbolts were still thrown. I looked at the thermostat. 60 degrees. The house was frigid, but I was sweating. I retreated to the living room, grabbing the heavy duvet from the couch and wrapping it around my shoulders. I sat facing the drawn curtains, the fireplace cold and dark. I checked the time on my phone, the screen brightness stinging my eyes. 10:15 p.m. The night was going to be an eternity, and I still had the knocking to look forward to at 3 a.m.
Time became a physical weight, pressing down on my chest with the same oppressive force as the timber beams overhead. To keep my mind from replaying the sound of my own voice screaming over the phone line, I focused on the cold. It was a sharp, biting chill that seeped through the duvet and into the marrow of my bones, a constant reminder that I was currently winning the game against the thermostat, but losing the war for comfort. I sat on the couch, my knees pulled up to my chest, creating a small island of body heat in the cavernous living room. I didn't dare turn on the TV again. The silence was safer. If I had the TV on, I might miss a sound I needed to hear. And in this house, hearing the threat seemed to be the only head start I was going to get. 11 p.m. came and went without fanfare, marked only by the digital shift of the pixels on my phone screen. I tried to read a book I'd brought with me, a paperback thriller about a detective hunting a serial killer. The irony wasn't lost on me. The words swam on the page, the sentences failing to string together into meaning. Every time I reached the end of a paragraph, my eyes would dart involuntarily to the hallway leading to the kitchen, or to the heavy, dark curtains that walled off the night. The house had a rhythm. I began to notice it around midnight. It wasn't silent, not truly. There was the low hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the cooling wood as the temperature dropped, and the occasional settling pop that sounded like a knuckle cracking in a quiet room. But then, at 12:43 a.m., the rhythm changed. It started directly above my head. Thump. I stopped breathing. The book slid from my lap and hit the rug with a soft thud. I didn't move to pick it up. My eyes drifted upward to the vaulted ceiling, staring at the dark planks of tongue and groove pine. Thump. Thump. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and heavy. They weren't the erotic scampers of a squirrel or the scratching of a raccoon in the attic. This was the cadence of a biped, someone walking with weight, someone wearing boots. The sound moved from the area above the living room toward the loft railing that overlooked the space where I sat. My heart hammered a frantic drum solo against my ribs. Logic, I told myself, use your logic. It's an old house. Wood contracts in the cold. Thermal expansion and contraction create acoustic anomalies. The footsteps stopped right at the edge of the loft. I felt a gaze. I couldn't explain it, but the hair on my arms stood up in a wave of static electricity. I felt exposed, like a bug under a microscope lens. I imagined someone standing up there, leaning over the rail, staring down at the top of my head in the dark.
Rule 8. If you hear someone walking upstairs when you are downstairs, it is just the house settling. Tell yourself this out loud. My throat was dry, like I'd swallowed a handful of sawdust. I licked my lips, tasting the metallic tang of fear. I had to say it. The rules said I had to believe it. It is just the house settling, I whispered. The silence that followed was thick and expectant. Creak. The floorboard above me groaned, a long, drawn-out sound of weight shifting. It sounded like someone mocking me. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the duvet until my knuckles turned white. I visualized the wood fibers. I visualized the physics of thermal contraction. I forced myself to reject the reality of the footsteps and embrace the lie of the architecture. It is just the house settling, I said again, louder this time. My voice shook, but I put forth behind it. It's just the temperature drop. There is no one up there. I waited. For 10 seconds, the only sound was the wind picking up outside, brushing the pine branches against the siding. The footsteps didn't resume. The presence, that heavy, staring weight, seemed to evaporate, leaving the air thin and cold again. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, the air puffing out in a white cloud before me. It worked. The rules worked. But that realization was a double-edged sword. If the rules worked, it meant the threats were real. It meant the thing upstairs was there, but it was bound by the same arbitrary laws that I was. I checked my phone. 1:15 a.m. Almost 2 hours until the knocking. I needed to move. Staying stagnant was making the paranoia worse. I decided to do a perimeter check, just the ground floor, just to make sure the windows were still locked and the curtains were tight. I stood up, the duvet trailing behind me like a royal cape of cowardice. I walked to the kitchen first. The space felt hostile now. The memory of my own voice screaming from that beige phone hung in the air. I gave the phone a wide berth, eyeing it like it was a coiled viper. I checked the back door. Locked. I checked the window above the sink. Locked. I moved to the hallway. The bathroom door was open. The tile floor inside gleamed in the faint ambient light. I stepped in to check the small window.
As I reached for the latch, I saw my reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror. I looked like hell, pale, eyes wide and rimmed with red, hair messy. I looked like the kind of guy who dies in the first 10 minutes of a horror movie. I grabbed the sink to steady myself, splashing some freezing cold water on my face. The shock of it helped. It grounded me. I dried my face with a rough towel and looked back at the mirror. For a fraction of a second, my reflection didn't move.
I had turned my head to the left, but the man in the mirror was still staring straight ahead, a neutral, dead-eyed expression on his face. I blinked, and the image corrected itself. I was looking left. The mirror was normal. Sleep deprivation, I muttered to the empty room. Just stress and exhaustion. I backed out of the bathroom, refusing to turn my back on the mirror until I was fully in the hallway. I returned to the living room and sat back down, this time facing the hallway, keeping the stairs and the kitchen in my peripheral vision. The wait resumed. 2 a.m., 2:30 a.m. The temperature in the house had dropped where I could feel the cold radiating off the floorboards. I was shivering, but I didn't dare touch the thermostat. The memory of that house groan, the sound of the structure screaming, was enough to keep me freezing. 2:45 a.m. I turned off my phone screen to save battery, though I had a charger. I just didn't want the light anymore. I wanted to adjust to the darkness so I could see if anything moved. 2:55 a.m. I sat perfectly still. My watch, an old analog Timex, ticked loudly on my wrist. Tick, tick, tick. It sounded like a countdown. Rule 3. You may hear knocking on the front door between 3 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. Do not open the door. Do not look through the peephole. Do not speak. I fixed my eyes on the front door. It was heavy, solid wood, reinforced with iron strapping. It looked like it could hold back a siege ram, but could it hold back whatever was out there? The minute hand on my watch swept past the 12. 3 a.m. The silence held for 30 seconds, then a minute. Maybe they wouldn't come tonight, I thought. Maybe it's not every night. Maybe I got lucky. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was polite. That was the worst part. It wasn't a monster battering down the door. It sounded like a neighbor stopping by to borrow sugar. It was crisp, rhythmic, and terrifyingly human. I flinched, biting the inside of my cheek to keep from making a noise. Knock, knock, knock. 3 sets of 3. That was the rule. I waited for the third set. Knock, knock, knock. Silence. I let out a slow, shaky breath through my nose. Okay, that was it. It was over. Hello? The voice came from outside the door. It was muffled by the thick wood, but clear enough. It was a woman's voice, soft, confused. Is anyone in there? My car broke down a few miles back. I saw the light. I froze. The rules didn't say anything about a voice. They just said knocking. They said do not speak. Please, the woman said, her voice hitching, sounding like she was on the verge of tears. It's freezing out here. I don't have a coat. I just need to use your phone. My survival instinct warred with my humanity.
Every empathetic circuit in my brain was screaming help her. It's minus 20 degrees out there. If there is a real woman outside, she will die in minutes. The location is vague, marked only as a pin drop deep in the Superior National Forest. No one just drives by here. This isn't a road to anywhere. I can hear you in there, she said. The tone shifted slightly, less desperate, more eager. I can hear your watch ticking. My blood ran cold. I covered my wrist with my hand, muffling the watch. Open the door, she said. I'm hurt. I'm bleeding. Do not open the door. Do not look through the peephole. Do not speak. I stared at the deadbolt. I could see the handle turning slowly, just a fraction of an inch. The lock held firm. Why are you doing this? The voice cried out, now sounding like a frightened child. Why are you so mean? It was psychological torture. It was designed to bypass logic and hit you right in the guilt center. I squeezed my eyes shut and started counting backwards from 100 in my head. 99, 98. Bam! A heavy impact shook the door, making the hinges rattle. Open the door! The voice dropped an octave. It wasn't a woman anymore. It sounded like 2 huge stones grinding together. It was a guttural, wet roar that vibrated through the floorboards and up into the soles of my feet. "I know you're in there, meat. Open the door or I'll peel this cabin like a grape." I scrambled backward, crab walking away from the door until my back hit the kitchen island. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound seemed to bypass my eardrums and resonate directly in my skull. Knock, knock, knock. The polite knocking returned, instantly replacing the demonic whoring. "Hello?" The sweet, feminine voice returned. "Are you okay? I heard a noise. Please let me in, I'm scared." The whiplash was dizzying. It was switching tactics, probing for a weakness. It was a predator playing with its food, testing the fences. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I stared at the door until my eyes watered. This went on for what felt like hours. The pleading, the screaming, the polite knocking. A carousel of nightmares spinning just inches away from my face. And then, abruptly, at 3:31 a.m., it stopped. No footsteps walking away, no car engine starting, just an instantaneous cut to silence, as if someone had flipped a switch on a recording. I stayed on the floor for another 20 minutes, shaking uncontrollably, watching the door. I waited for the trick. I waited for the smash of glass or the splintering of wood. But the silence held. I slowly pulled myself up, my legs feeling like jelly. I needed to sit down properly. I needed water. I walked to the kitchen sink, my movements stiff and jerky.
I grabbed a glass and filled it from the top. My hand was shaking so bad, water sloshed over the rim. I took a sip. Then I heard it, scratching. Not from the front door, not from the windows. It was coming from the basement door. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It sounded like long, hard nails digging into the wood, trying to find purchase. Rule 5. If you hear scratching from the other side of the basement door, turn on the television to maximum volume and wait for morning. I dropped the glass. It shattered on the tile floor, shards of glass and water exploding outward. I didn't care. I sprinted to the living room, vaulting over the back of the couch. I grabbed the remote with sweaty, trembling fingers. I hit the power button. Nothing happened. I hit it again. The screen remained black. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced my chest. I mashed the button. Come on, you piece of junk. The scratching got louder, faster. It wasn't just scratching now, it was digging. I could hear wood splintering. Something was trying to tunnel through. I looked at the TV cord. It was unplugged. I must have kicked it loose during my earlier panic or when I was checking the perimeter. The scratching turned into a thud. The doorknob to the basement jiggled violently. I dove behind the TV stand, fumbling in the dark for the plug and the outlet. My fingers brushed against the dust bunnies and tangled wires. Thud, thud, thud. The basement door rattled in its frame. The wood groaned, not the thermal groan, but the sound of physical stress. The deadbolts were holding, but for how long? Got it, I hissed, jamming the plug into the wall socket. A spark popped blue in the darkness. I scrambled back, pointing the remote like a weapon. Power! The screen flared to life, a blinding blue square in the dark room. Static roared through the speakers, white noise at volume level 15. I held the volume up button down. The bar on the screen climbed. 20, 30, 50, 100. The static screamed. It was deafening, a wall of electronic chaos that drowned out the wind, the house settling, and, most importantly, the sound of the basement door being assaulted. I curled up on the rug in front of the TV, bathed in the flickering blue light, the static washing over me like a physical shield. The noise was painful, sharp daggers in my ears, but it was beautiful. I couldn't hear the scratching anymore, and if I couldn't hear it, the rules implied it couldn't get me. I lay there, staring at the snowy grain of the television, watching shapes form and dissolve in the static. I wondered if I was going insane. I wondered if the static was masking the sound of the door finally giving way, and if the next thing I'd feel was a cold hand on my shoulder. But nothing came. I lay there for hours, my senses battered by the noise, until the blue light of the TV began to fade, replaced by the gray, sickly light of dawn creeping through the gaps in the curtains. Morning. I had survived the first night. I crawled over to the window and peeked through the curtain. The sun was rising over the tree line,
casting long, peaceful shadows across the pristine snow. The world looked normal. The horrors of the night seemed to retract into the earth, burning away like mist. I stood up and turned off the TV. The silence that rushed back into the room was ringing and absolute. I walked to the kitchen. I stepped over the broken glass. I looked at the basement door. The 3 deadbolts were still locked, but near the bottom of the door, the white paint was stripped away. Deep, jagged gouges marred the wood, curled strips of oak hanging loose like peeled skin. Something had tried very hard to get out. I made coffee. I didn't have an appetite, but I needed the caffeine. I sat at the island, staring at the gouges in the door, sipping the hot, bitter liquid. 1 night down, 13 to go. I looked at the list of rules again. I had survived Rule 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 8. I still had Rule 6 and Rule 7 to deal with. The deer in the feeding. As if on cue, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Through the massive glass windows overlooking the valley, down in the yard where the snow was deepest. A deer. It was a large buck, its antlers majestic against the morning sky. It stood motionless, staring at the cabin. I felt a surge of relief. A normal animal, a sign of life in this frozen hellscape. I stood up and walked to the window to get a better look, admiring the creature. It was beautiful. Then, the deer twitched. It didn't move like an animal. It moved like a glitching video game character. A sharp, unnatural jerk. And then, slowly, agonizingly, it rose up. It didn't rear up on its hind legs to reach a branch. It stood up. It straightened its spine. Its front legs hung limply at its sides like human arms with broken wrists. It stood perfectly upright, 6 feet tall, balancing with an impossible center of gravity. It turned its head. Not the way a deer turns, leading with the nose. It rotated its neck almost a full 180 degrees. It looked directly at me. Its eyes were not the eyes of a deer. They were forward-facing, predator eyes, and they were far too human. Rule 6. If you see a deer standing on its hind legs in the yard, do not take a picture, do not stare. Turn off the lights and lay flat on the floor. It is looking for a silhouette. I threw myself to the ground. My coffee cup hit the floor, spilling hot brown liquid across the hardwood. I didn't care. I pressed my face into the floorboards, flattening my body as much as I could. I reached up blindly and slapped the wall switch, killing the kitchen lights. I lay there, heart hammering against the wood. I waited for the sound of glass breaking. I waited for the sound of hooves on the floor. I'm just the caretaker, I whispered into the dust. I'm just the caretaker. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it a sound that no deer should ever make. It sounded like a laugh, a dry, wheezing, rattling laugh. I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed for the sun to climb higher. This was only the first morning, and I was already learning the most important rule of all, the one they hadn't written down. In Blackwood Ridge, you are never truly inside. You are just a little harder to reach. I stayed on the floor until the sunlight hitting the kitchen tiles shifted from a soft morning gold to a harsh, blinding white. My muscles were locked up, cramped from the tension and the cold draft seeping through the floorboards, but I didn't dare move until I was certain the yard was empty. When I finally peeled myself off the hardwood, checking the window with a quick, terrified glance, the deer was gone. The snow was undisturbed, save for a few deep, puncture-like hoofprints that looked heavy enough to crack bone. I needed to sleep. My body was shutting down, the adrenaline crash leaving me nauseous and trembling. I told myself I would just close my eyes for an hour, just enough to reset my brain so I didn't hallucinate my own face in the mirror again. I wrapped the duvet tighter around my shoulders and curled up on the rug in the living room, facing away from the windows, facing away from the basement door. I didn't want to see the gouges. I didn't want to think about what kind of fingernails could strip oak like wet paper. Just an hour, I thought. But exhaustion is a thief. It steals time when you aren't looking. I woke up to the sound of wind whistling through the chimney. My eyes snapped open, dry and gritty. The room was different. The quality of the light had changed. It wasn't the bright white of midday anymore. It was dim, gloomy. The shadows of the furniture stretched long and distorted across the floor, reaching toward me like dark fingers. I sat up, my heart giving a painful, confused thud in my chest. I scrambled for my phone, tapping the screen. 4:48 p.m. Sunset was at 4:32 p.m. The blood drained from my face so fast it made me dizzy. I scrambled to my feet, the duvet tangling around my legs, tripping me. I hit the floor, scrambled up again, and spun around to face the wall of glass. The curtains. Rule 2. From the hours of sunset to sunrise, the curtains in the main living room must remain drawn. They were wide open, and outside, the world was blue, that deep, suffocating twilight blue that exists for only a few minutes before total blackness takes over. The pine trees were black silhouettes against the dying light, a jagged jawline of teeth biting into the sky. I lunged for the cords. My hand grabbed the heavy velvet fabric. But I stopped. I stopped because I saw them. In the tree line, 50 yards out. Lights. They weren't flashlights. They weren't the steady, warm glow of a lantern. They were pale, sickly orbs of luminescence floating about 7 feet off the ground. They hovered in the darkness between the trunks, motionless. There were dozens of them, a silent audience. Do not look at them. The instructions screamed in my mind, but it was too late.
My brain, desperate for information, desperate to identify the threat, had already locked onto the signal. I was staring right at them. And then, the lights changed. They didn't blink, they flared. They grew brighter, shifting from a dull moon white to a piercing, angry violet. They knew, if they realize you can see them, they will come closer. The movement was instantaneous. It wasn't a walk, it was a glitch in reality. 1 second the lights were at the tree line, the next they were 10 yards closer, then another 10. They were rushing the house. I screamed, a raw, involuntary sound that tore at my throat. I yanked the curtain cord with both hands, putting my entire body weight into it. The heavy velvet swung shut, swooshing across the rail, blocking out the blue twilight, blocking out the trees. But just before the two halves of the curtain met in the middle, I saw the leading light reach the glass. It wasn't a light. It was a face. A pale, translucent face with no mouth and eyes that burned like magnesium flares. The curtains slammed together. Darkness engulfed the living room. I backed away, hyperventilating, my hands shaking so hard I could barely make fists. I didn't see it, I whispered, my voice trembling. I didn't see it. I didn't see it. Thump. A soft, wet impact against the glass, right on the other side of the curtain. Then another. Thump. And another. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like moths hitting a porch light, if moths weighed 200 pounds. They were throwing themselves against the window. I stumbled back, knocking over the coffee table. The noise was deafening in the enclosed space. The sound of stress, the sound of reinforced glass hitting its tolerance limit. I turned and ran. I sprinted into the kitchen, my socks sliding on the smooth floor. I didn't know where to go. The bedroom was upstairs. Rule 8 made the upstairs a no-go zone. The basement was a death trap that left the bathroom or the pantry. I chose the pantry. It was a small, windowless closet off the kitchen, stocked with canned goods and the smell of dry pasta. I dove inside and pulled the door shut, fumbling for the lock. It was a flimsy privacy lock, something you could pick with a paperclip, but it was all I had. I sat in the pitch black, hugging my knees, listening. The thumping in the living room had stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was a heavy, pregnant silence, the kind that comes right before a thunderclap. I held my breath, straining my ears.
Sometimes not by bitter. But whatever was out there didn't seem to care about the tensile strength of a factory-standard latch. Pop. Metal snapped. Then the slow, rolling rumble of the door sliding open on its tracks. Wind rushed into the house. I could hear it hissing through the gap, carrying the sound of the freezing forest into the warm living room. The temperature dropped instantly. I could feel the draft even under the pantry door. Rule 1. The thermostat must never be set above 68 degrees.
If the house gets too warm, the timber expands. You do not want the gaps to open. But the cold was rushing in. The thermostat would sense the drop. The automated heating system would kick in to compensate. I heard the furnace roar to life in the basement. It sounded like a jet engine spooling up. The house began to tick. Then, footsteps. Not the heavy boot steps from the floor above. These were different. These were light, click-clack, click-clack, like hard claws on hard wood. There were multiple. They were inside. I pressed my hands over my mouth, tears leaking from my eyes. I squeezed them shut, terrified that if I opened them, I would see those violet lights glowing through the crack under the door. Click-clack, click-clack. They were moving through the living room, sniffing. I could hear deep, wet inhalations. They were smelling the air, smelling the fear, smelling the unwashed sweat of a man who had made a mistake. The footsteps moved toward the kitchen. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The sound was tiny, a buzz against my thigh, but in the silence of the hunt, it sounded like a chainsaw. I froze. My heart stopped. The clicking footsteps stopped instantly. They had heard it. I slowly, agonizingly pulled the phone out. The screen lit up the tiny pantry with a ghostly green glow. It was an email notification. Sender, the owners. Subject, urgent, sensors triggered. I tapped it with a trembling finger. The message was short. We received an alert from the glass break sensors in the living room. The perimeter has been breached. You have broken Rule 2. There is no rule for what happens next. Run. The footsteps outside the pantry door shifted. A shadow fell across the gap at the bottom of the door, blocking the sliver of light from the kitchen. Something inhaled right on the other side of the wood, a long, shuddering breath that rattled in a wet throat. I can hear your heart, a voice whispered. It wasn't my voice this time. It wasn't the woman's voice. It sounded like static. It sounded like the empty space between radio stations, shaped into words. It tastes fast. I didn't think. I didn't plan. The run from the email bypassed my logic center and hotwired my muscles. I kicked the pantry door open.
It smashed into something solid, something that felt like a bag of wet cement. A screech of surprise and pain erupted from the darkness, a sound like tearing metal. I didn't look. Don't look back. I scrambled out, slipping on the tile, and bolted for the hallway. The kitchen was full of them. I saw them in my peripheral vision, tall, spindly shadows with burning violet eyes, crouching on the counters, hanging from the ceiling beams like spiders. I reached the hallway and turned left, toward the only room with a lock that meant anything, the basement door. I knew the rules. We do not have a basement. We have never gone down them. But the living room was full of monsters, and the front door was blocked. I slammed into the basement door, my hands fumbling with the 3 deadbolts. Click, click, click. I threw them open. Behind me, the clicking of claws on tile turned into a stampede. A chorus of shrieks erupted, shaking the walls. I grabbed the handle and yanked the door open. Darkness, absolute, smelling of earth and old, stale air. I threw myself inside and slammed the door shut, locking the top deadbolt just as a heavy body slammed against the wood from the other side. The door bowed inward, wood splintered. I locked the second bolt, the third. I backed away, down the first few steps, panting, sobbing. I was safe. I was out of the kitchen. Then I remembered Rule 5. If you unlock that door, you will find stairs going down. We do not know where they go. I turned around. There was no light switch, but from deep, deep down in the dark, far below where the foundation of the house should have ended, I saw a faint red glow. And I heard music. It was old, distorted calliope music, carnival music, playing slow and warped. And beneath the music, the sound of thousands of people whispering my name. I stood on the stairs, trapped between the monsters in the kitchen and the madness in the dark. I looked at the phone in my hand, 1 bar of service. I dialed 911. It rang once. 911, what is your emergency? I'm at the Blackwood Ridge cabin, I gasped. They're inside the house.
There was a pause, a long, static-filled pause. "Sir," the operator said. Her voice was flat, monotone. "There is no cabin at Blackwood Ridge. That structure burned down in 1994. "What? No, I'm here. I'm renting it." "Sir," she said, and her voice began to change. It began to drop in pitch. It began to sound like stones grinding together. "You aren't renting it. You are the meal." The call ended. From the darkness below, the whispering got louder. "He's here. He's here. He's here." I sat down on the step and put my head in my hands. I had 12 nights left.
The wood of the door at the top of the stairs gave a sickening crock, snapping me out of my paralysis. The top deadbolt tore free from the frame, showering the landing in splinters and drywall dust. A long, pale arm, too many joints, too few fingers, snaked through the gap, blindly grasping for the lock mechanism of the second bolt. I scrambled backward, my boots scuffing against the rough wooden steps. The logic of the situation was simple and brutal. Staying here meant death by dismemberment. Going down meant death by, well, I didn't know yet, but unknown variables were preferable to known constants when the constant was being eaten alive. I stood up, gripping the railing. The wood felt slimy, coated in a thick condensation-like residue that smelled of copper. I took one last look at the door as the second deadbolt began to groan under the assault. The violet light from the kitchen spilled through the crocks, casting frantic, strobing shadows against the basement walls. I turned and descended. The stairs were steep and narrow, reminiscent of a servant's passage in a Victorian house, not a modern A-frame cabin. I counted the steps as a way to ground myself. 1, 2, 3. Logic, physics, depth. A standard basement is, 10 feet deep? 12? I hit step 20. I hit step 30. The air grew heavy and humid. The biting cold of the Minnesota winter was replaced by a cloying, suffocating warmth that smelled of wet earth and cotton candy. The carnival music was distinct now, a warped loop of a cheerful organ tune that sounded like it was being played underwater. At step 50, the staircase finally ended. I stepped off the last riser onto a dirt floor that was packed hard, almost like concrete. The red glow I had seen from above wasn't coming from a single source. It seemed to be emanating from the walls themselves, pulsating gently like the inside of a living vein. I was in a tunnel. It was round, shored up by rotting timber beams that looked centuries old. Roots from the trees above punched through the ceiling, dangling like hangman's nooses, brushing against the top of my head. "Hello," I whispered. The habit was hard to break. "Hello, hello, hello." The whisper came back from the darkness ahead, but it wasn't an echo. It was a chorus, dozens of voices overlapping, mimicking my tone, my pitch, my fear. I clamped my mouth shut and brought up my phone flashlight. The beam cut through the red haze, revealing that the tunnel stretched on endlessly in both directions. To my left, the darkness was absolute. To my right, the red glow was brighter, and the music was louder. A crash from high above echoed down the stairwell, the sound of a door finally giving way. Then, the wet, clicking scramble of claws on wood.
They were coming down. I didn't have a choice. I ran to the right, toward the light and the music. The tunnel twisted and turned, defying any architectural sense. I passed alcoves dug into the dirt walls. In one, a pile of old, rusty license plates from the 70s. In another, a stock of children's shoes, all left-footed. The collection of a madman or the digestive tract of a monster. The footsteps behind me were getting louder. Click-clack, click-clack. They were faster than me. They were built for pursuit. I rounded a sharp corner and skidded to a halt. The tunnel opened up into a cavernous room. The ceiling was lost in shadow, but the floor was a chaotic sprawl of debris. And in the center of the room, illuminated by a spotlight that seemed to come from nowhere, was a stage. It was a small wooden stage, like something you'd see in a high school auditorium. On it sat an old animatronic band, a bear with a banjo, a duck with a drum, and a dog with a guitar. Their fur was moth-eaten, revealing the steel endoskeletons beneath. Their eyes were missing, leaving empty block sockets. They were playing the music. The instruments weren't plugged in, but the sound poured out of them, distorted and grinding. Rule 9, I thought hysterically, Is there a rule for the band? I scanned the room for a hiding spot. The clicking was just around the bend. To my left, a stock of wooden crates marked FEMA Supplies, 1994. To my right, a massive iron furnace door set into the earth wall, cold and dark. I dove behind the crates, squeezing myself into the gap between the rotting wood and the dirt wall. I pulled my knees to my chest and killed my flashlight. I held my breath. The violet light spilled into the cavern from the tunnel entrance. 3 of them skittered into the room. From my vantage point, I could only see their legs. They were impossibly long, like the legs of a spider crab, ending in sharp obsidian points that clicked against the hard dirt. They moved with a jerky stop-motion animation style that made my eyes water. They stopped at the edge of the stage. The animatronic band kept playing, oom-pa-pa, oom-pa-pa. One of the creatures hissed, a sound like high-pressure steam escaping a valve. It lowered its head, sniffing the air. I saw its face for a brief second in the red ambient light. It was smooth, featureless white skin, stretched tight over a skull that was slightly too large. No mouth, no nose, just those 2 burning violet eyes. It snapped its head toward the crates. It knew. My hand drifted to my pocket, gripping the pocket knife, a toothpick against a tank. The creature took a step toward me. Click. Then another. Click. The music abruptly stopped. The silence was instant and violent. The bear with the banjos stopped strumming. The duck froze mid-beat. The creature paused. It turned its head back towards the stage. A deep, mechanical grinding noise echoed from the animatronics. The bear's jaw unhinged, dropping open to an impossible width. "You," the bear said. It wasn't a recorded voice. It was the voice of the old man from the gas station. "You don't belong here," the bear continued, its moth-eaten head twitching. "The basement is for the guests. The woods are for the hunters." The violet-eyed creatures shrieked, a sound of genuine fear. They backed away, their claws scrabbling for purchase on the dirt. "Get out," the bear roared, its voice shifting into the demonic bass I had heard at the front door. "Get out." The creatures turned and fled. They scrambled back up the tunnel, their limbs tangling over each other in their haste to escape the stage. I listened until the clicking faded back up the stairs. I was alone with the band. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I waited for the bear to turn its empty sockets toward me. I waited for it to say, "You too." But the animatronics simply slumped forward, dead and silent. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. My legs were cramping. I slowly, carefully uncoiled from behind the crates. I looked at the stairs. I couldn't go back up. The door was broken and the kitchen was their territory. But if the bear was right, if the basement was for the guests, then maybe I was safer down here. Or maybe I was just being saved for dessert. I looked at the iron furnace door. It was slightly ajar. I walked over to it, drawn by a draft of cool, fresh air that smelled of pine needles and snow. I pulled the heavy iron handle. The hinges screamed in protest, but the door swung open. It wasn't a furnace. It was a tunnel, a concrete utility tunnel lined with pipes and cables leading slightly upward. I climbed inside. The tunnel was cramped. I had to crawl on my hands and knees. The concrete was rough, scraping my palms raw. I crawled for what felt like miles. My mind drifted, disassociating from the pain and the fear, focusing on the rhythmic slap of my hands against the floor. Slap, drag, slap, drag. Eventually, the tunnel ended at a metal grate. I pushed against it. It was loose. I shoved it aside and pulled myself up, tumbling out onto cold, hard linoleum. I gasped, rolling onto my back, staring up at fluorescent lights, humming with a headache-inducing buzz. I sat up. I was in a gas station aisle. To my left were rows of potato chips. To my right, a cooler full of sodas. I stood up, dizzy and confused. I walked to the front counter. The old man was there, the one with the leathery skin. He was reading a newspaper. He didn't look up as I approached.
My voice was a croak. I escaped. The old man turned a page. "Did you?" I looked out the window. Outside, it wasn't the gas station parking lot. It wasn't the highway. It was the woods, the Blackwood Ridge forest. The trees were pressed right up against the glass, their branches scratching against the panes. And in the reflection of the glass, I saw myself. But it wasn't me. My eyes were violet. The old man finally looked up. He smiled, and his teeth were made of jagged pine needles. "Roll 10, he whispered. "If you escape the cabin, make sure you didn't bring it with you." I looked down at my hands. They were lengthening. My fingers were stretching, adding joints, turning pale and translucent. I tried to scream, but the only sound that came out was a high-pitched, static hiss. No, I thought. No, this is a hallucination. This is the panic. "It's just the house settling," the old man said, mocking me. I backed away, knocking over a stand of beef jerky. I fell to the floor, my legs no longer working like human legs. They bent backward. I looked at the door of the gas station. The bell jingled. A man walked in. He looked tired. He looked broke. He was driving a Honda Civic loaded with gear. He looked at me, at the thing writhing on the floor, with wide, terrified eyes. "Help me," I tried to say, but what came out was, "We do not know where they go." The man stepped back, terrified. The old man behind the counter chuckled. "Don't mind him, son. Just a local stray. You're going up to the Blackwood Ridge?" The new man nodded, pale. "Yeah, house sitting." "The money is good," the old man muttered. I watched, paralyzed, as the cycle began again. I watched him buy the jerky. I watched him buy the lighter. I wanted to warn him. I wanted to tell him about the thermostat, the curtains, the basement. But as he walked past me to leave, all I could do was whistle. A low, rhythmic whistle. "Don't answer the whistling," the old man had told me. The new caretaker paused at the door. He looked back at me, and for a second, just a second, he looked like he was going to answer. Then he shook his head, laughed nervously, and walked out into the night. I lay on the linoleum, feeling my humanity evaporate like steam in the cold. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The old man went back to his paper. And the woods outside pressed closer, waiting for the sun to go down. I closed my violet eyes and listened to the sound of the Honda Civic driving away, driving toward the cabin, driving toward the end. I was part of the rules now, and I had work to do.
The first task was the hardest, not because of the physical exertion. My new limbs possessed a tensile strength that mocked the limits of human biology, but because of the muscle memory of morality that still fired in the synapses of my rotting brain. I had to reset the stage. The cabin, which I had just seen as a fortress of terror, was now my workspace, and like any good employee, I had to ensure it was presentable for the next shift. I moved through the woods not by walking, but by pulling the shadows around me like a cloak, stepping through the gaps in the static where the world hadn't fully rendered. I reached the ridge in seconds. The cabin stood there, wounded and open, the front door hanging off its hinges and the basement lock shattered. I approached the front door. I didn't need tools. My fingers, long, translucent, and tipped with bone that felt like obsidian, traced the splintered wood. With a thought that felt less like conscious effort and more like executing a line of code, the wood groaned and knit itself back together. The iron stropping reformed. The deadbolt clicked into place, shiny and new. I entered the kitchen. The smell of copper and fear was delicious now, a sensory bouquet that made my stomach, or whatever void now occupied my torso, rumble with anticipation. I stepped over the coffee stain I had made that morning. I looked at the shattered glass on the floor. "Clean it up," the urge whispered. "The guest expects a clean house." I swept the glass into my palm. It didn't cut me. I crushed the shards into dust and let them drift onto the floorboards, where they dissolved into the wood, feeding the house. Then I went to the island. I reached into the air, literally into the empty space above the granite, and pulled out a fresh, cream-colored envelope. I placed it squarely in the center. I pulled out a stack of cash from the ether, $1,500 bills, fresh, crisp,
the bait. I laid the new rule sheet on top. It was identical to the one I had read, except for one small addition at the bottom, glowing in ink that only I could see. Rule 11. The previous caretaker is still on the premises. Do not trust the whistling. I retreated to the basement. The darkness down here was no longer blinding. It was a spectrum of grays and violets, rich with texture. I saw the animatronics on the stage in the tunnel below. The bear raised its head as I descended the stairs. It didn't speak this time. It just nodded, a slight dip of its moth-eaten snout, acknowledging a new junior associate. I found a corner in the dirt tunnel, amidst the roots and the smell of ancient soil, and I waited. Time in the Blackwood Ridge doesn't flow in a straight line. It loops and eddies like a stagnant river.
I spent what felt like weeks huddled in the dark, listening to the house settle, listening to the wind scream. I practiced my whistling. It was the only sound I could make that didn't shatter glass. It was a mournful tune, 3 notes ascending, 3 descending. Eventually, the silence was broken. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Tires on snow. A Honda Civic. I scurried up the basement stairs, pressing my ear against the cold wood of the door. I could hear him unloading his gear. I could hear him humming to himself, a nervous, jagged sound. I could hear the beep, beep, beep of the keypad code being entered. The door opened, heavy boots on hardwood. The pause as he saw the envelope, the rip of paper. $3,000, a voice whispered. A young voice, desperate, just like I had been. I felt a pang of sorrow, sharp and cold, but it was quickly subsumed by the hunger. The hunger was the new logic. It was the biological imperative that overrode empathy. I wasn't a man anymore. I was an ecosystem. The first night began. I stayed in the basement, adhering to the protocol. I let the house do the work. The groaning walls, the thermal contraction. I could feel him upstairs, pacing, his heart rate vibrating through the floor joists like a dinner bell. At 3 a.m., the old man from the gas station came to the front door. I could sense his presence, a massive, dense gravity on the porch. I heard the knocking, 3 sets of 3. I heard the new caretaker holding his breath in the kitchen. "Hello?" The old man's voice called out, using the stolen voice of a woman. "Is anyone in there?" The kid didn't answer. He was smart. He was following Rule 3. The night passed. The sun rose. The days blurred into a cycle of stalking and waiting. I watched him from the tree line during the day, my violet eyes tracking his silhouette in the window. I saw him staring at the deer, my colleague, the skinwalker, and I saw him drop to the floor just in time. He was good. He was surviving. But survival is just a delay of the inevitable. On the 7th night, the variable changed. It wasn't the supernatural that breached the perimeter. It was the mundane. Blue and red lights flashed through the forest, cutting through the eternal twilight. Sirens wailed, distant and distorted by the tense pine. A search party. They shouldn't have been here. The GPS coordinates for this place lead to a swamp 40 miles east, but somehow, a glitch in the matrix or a persistent family member had guided them to the ridge. I watched from the roof of the cabin, clinging to the wet shingles with my elongated limbs. 2 deputies in an A9 unit. They stepped out of their cruiser, their hands hovering over their holsters. The dog was whining, tail tucked between its legs, refusing to move forward. "Police!" one of the deputies shouted, his flashlight beam cutting across the snow. "Is anyone out here?" The new caretaker ran to the window. He had made it a week. He looked gaunt, eyes wild, holding a kitchen knife. He saw the police and broke Rule 2. He ripped the curtains open. "I'm here!" he screamed, pounding on the glass. "Help me, they're in the trees." The deputy shone the light on the cabin. "Jesus, look at that place. It looks like it's been abandoned for decades." To them, the cabin wasn't the pristine A-frame the caretaker saw.
To them, it was a rotting husk, roof caved in, windows jagged and broken. They couldn't see the glass he was pounding on. They just saw a madman miming against thin air in a ruin. "Sir, step out of the structure," the deputy yelled. The caretaker was confused. "I can't. The doors are locked. The rules say I can't open them." "Sir, there is no door," the deputy muttered to his partner. "He's standing in a pile of rubble." The dog started barking, not at the man, but at the roof, at me. The deputy swung his light upward. The beam hit me. I didn't flinch. I didn't hide. I was part of the rules now, and there was no rule saying I had to hide from the law. I unfurled to my full height, 12 feet of pale, impossible geometry against the night sky. My violet eyes flared, burning the image into their retinas. The deputy dropped his flashlight. He didn't scream, he just made a wet, choking sound. "Rule 12, I whispered, my voice sounding like wind tearing through dry leaves. "No outside interference." I leapt. The violence was short, efficient, and devoid of malice. It was simply the immune system of the forest purging a foreign body. When it was over, the snow was stained with a color darker than the twilight. The dog ran into the woods, yelping, and I let it go. Stories need witnesses, even if those witnesses are canine. I returned to the cabin. The caretaker was huddled in the kitchen, sobbing. He had seen it all through the glass. He knew now. He knew that the police weren't the rescue. They were just appetizers. He looked at his phone. He was typing furiously. He was posting his story. He was uploading the warning to the internet, hoping that someone, anyone, would read it and know he had existed. I phased through the wall, entering the kitchen behind him. I stood over him, watching the blue light of the screen illuminate his tear-streaked face. He was writing about the gas station. He was writing about the rules. He hit post. I let him do it. Because that's how the trap works. You are reading this now, aren't you?
You are sitting in your room, or on the bus, or at your desk, reading the account of the survivor. You are thinking, wow, that's creepy. You are thinking, I would never fall for that. But then you'll open a new tab. You'll browse Craigslist or Airbnb, looking for a getaway. You'll see a listing, a winter caretaker position. The pay will be just a little too good. The location will be vague. And you'll remember this story. You'll think, it's just a story. It's not real. And that doubt, that tiny sliver of rationalization, that is the invitation. The caretaker turned around. He saw me. He saw the violet eyes. He saw the uniform of the thing he was destined to become. He didn't scream. He just dropped the phone. I finished the list, he whispered, his mind finally snapping under the weight of the reality. I followed the rules. I smiled, my mouth opening wider than a human mouth should. The rules are for the guests, I said, placing a long, cold hand on his shoulder. And checkout time was 5 minutes ago. I picked up his phone from the floor. The screen was cracked, but the post was live. I scrolled down to the comments. People were already replying. Fake. Great creative writing. OP is a liar. I typed one final comment, using his trembling finger to hit the keys. User Blackwood-caretaker. Comment. It's all true. Come see for yourself. The keys are under the mat. I turned off the screen. The woods outside were silent. The snow was falling, covering the blood, covering the tracks, resetting the world to a blank white page. I dragged the caretaker toward the basement door. He didn't fight. He was whistling now, a low, rhythmic tune. We had work to do.